Okay, so we're back. Um, so now we're going to look at a couple of research specific, uh, or rather statistics specific to this research article. So the first one that it mentions that I want you to know what it's talking about is the log rank test. So in this study, they do use survival data, meaning mortality is the outcome. And the log rank test just compares the difference in survival times between two groups, but it doesn't allow for confounding, which means, right, I could compare based on a single factor. So I could compare a group with a non-communicable disease, right? So obesity, diabetes, type 2, or obesity, type 2 diabetes, cancer, metabolic syndrome, etc., to a population without one of those chronic diseases. I could also compare, so let's say, a group of individuals whose age is between the range of 10 to 50 to those 50 and above. So that would be the log rank test. Uh, and when I'm looking at this population has a baseline hazard. So all that means is that at any given time point, independent of any variable, just the population I'm working with and their data, that at any given time point, let's say my time point is 1 year, at any given time point, there's a certain hazard risk, meaning there's a chance of dying at any time point. So in this time point, one person died. In this time point, one person died. This time point, one person died. This time point, two people died. And then in this time point, one person died. Okay, so all this is saying, and you do not need to memorize this. You don't need to know exactly how everything's calculated. I just want you to understand it for the article. All this is saying is that at any given time point, your risk changes, right? So here my risk might be pretty low, right? So the hazard there at that time point is 0.167. My hazard during this time point is actually even lower because you see I went for a longer period of time before I hit one death. So actually my risk there is very low. My risk here is also still pretty low. And then you see that change dramatically right here where I had those two deaths in a single year. Okay, so that's my two deaths. And I notice my chances also change because my total population is changing, right? Because I started with 6 people, now I'm down to 5, now I'm down to 4, now I'm down to 3, and then I have 3 people here, and then I lose 2 of them. So here I lost 2 out of 3, whereas here I was only losing 1 out of 6. So that's why that hazard ratio changes a little bit, and you see that getting higher. And then at the end, right, everyone in this particular example did die. And so my chances of being dead at this time point were 1. Everyone, because everyone was. And this is called the Kaplan-Meier curve. Now, I really am honing in on this because this is really important for the next slide. So you have a certain baseline hazard, and then we use that for a multivariable Cox regression. I know this slide is intimidating. You do not need to know this or memorize it. I'm just using it to talk you through what they do in this study. So first, we've got regression. We came across that term already. So we know that that's a relationship between two variables, okay? So, and then we want multivariable, meaning I am actually interested in a couple of different things. And then the Cox piece is I'm using survival data. So mortality is my outcome of interest, okay? So I want to know my hazard at a given time. HOT, so sorry, HT is the total risk of dying at a given point in time. We'll take you by the bullet points. X represents any predictor variable I use. So it could be one of my confounding variables like age, sex, income, or it could be one of my covariates, one of the things that I'm really interested in, like smoking or physical activity. Okay. My B up here in this equation represents a coefficient, and how that coefficient, what's the magnitude of change for that variable if all the other variables remain the same. Okay, so, or another way of saying that is controlling for or adjusting for all other variables. So actually, we'll get to an example in just a moment. If the B value is positive, it indicates there's an increased log hazard. Okay, so it's not quite hazard ratio yet, which is what the article uses. It's an increased log hazard or a decreased log hazard. And then HOT is the baseline hazard at time t. So remember that that hazard changes across time, right? We saw that in this slide. So if I'm looking at this time period, then I need to use that time period's hazard, right? So just know that that hazard is changing across time. Then we've got to do some fancy math here. And now I can say if I get my hazard ratio, so represented by HR, there's a change in the outcome. So hazard ratio represents a change in the outcome. So my change in my risk for mortality with a 1 unit change in my variable. So if my variable X is gender, let's say, so, or sex rather. So if I'm going to use male versus female, X might represent, if it's a 1, it might be male sex, right? So if male sex is a 1 here, then I would say, and my HR is 1.05, I would say that if I'm male, I increase my hazard ratio or hazard risk by 5%. So my mortality risk goes up 5% if I'm male in this example. Okay, so a hazard ratio of greater than 1 indicates increased hazard, and less than 1 indicates decreased hazard. So if I were male and this number were 0.95, now I would say I have a 5% decreased chance of mortality when compared to females. Okay, and you can multiply that by 100 to get your percentage. So the 1.05, right, is 105%, whereas the 100 represents my reference value, and then the extra 5% is the extra risk. Okay. All right. If you're confused here, I get it. I hope that as you read the article, it'll become a little bit clearer. I just wanted to give you sort of a baseline understanding so that you weren't going in blind to the article. Okay, this is a figure that represents what the article does in its statistical analysis, or it tries to. So this article is interested in the non-communicable disease population, meaning everyone in this study who enrolled in this study has a non-communicable disease, meaning they have, I think the article classifies it as metabolic syndrome, obesity, type 2 diabetes, or cancer. I believe those are the 4. There might be one more that they use. In any case, that is the population that I'm working with first. Then I'm interested in high-risk lifestyle factors. So these are my exposures. And I'm looking at my outcome, which is mortality. Okay, so risk for death. Now, they look at a lot of different high-risk lifestyle factors, but the 4 that sort of come out as most important are SB, which is sedentary behavior, low amounts of physical activity, smoking, and inflammatory diet. So these would all be considered covariates, okay? Here in the blue, we have our confounding variables. So they had a couple. The 2 that came out as most important and impactful were education and income. All this means is these aren't the variables that I'm interested in, but I know that age, for example, especially, is going to have an effect on mortality. As I increase in age, my risk for mortality is going to go up. So I need to control for that in my statistical analysis. And they use the word adjusted. That means the same thing as control. Okay. And then I wanted to briefly go through a mediator and a moderator. So they don't speak about mediators, they only speak about moderators. The difference is that a mediator is found on the causal pathway, meaning, so the red represents there is a relationship between sedentary behavior and mortality. That does exist. What the orange is representing is that if someone has low amounts of physical activity, especially considering that there's a 24-hour movement cycle, if I have low physical activity, by necessity, I am sitting more. Therefore, I would say that low physical activity mediates the association between sedentary behavior and mortality. Okay. Now, moderating is different because it means it's not on the causal pathway. So mediators are on the causal pathway between this main effect, so sedentary behavior and mortality, a mediator's on the causal pathway. So low physical activity might be on the causal pathway between sedentary behavior and mortality. However, sedentary behavior and low physical activity, although they may not be on the causal pathway between smoking and mortality, they do impact smoking and mortality. Okay, so that's the big difference, is it's not causal in this case, right? Because there are a lot of sedentary people who don't smoke. There are also a lot of people who are experience low physical activity who also don't smoke. Okay, so they're not on the causal pathway directly, but they still will influence the relationship because, for example, maybe somebody who smokes is less likely to be physically active or is less likely to be sedentary, but it's not causal. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Hope this figure helps you sort of wrap your mind around the statistical analysis that they do. Okay, again, I would take a little break here, right? We've just covered a lot of material. Maybe take a break, maybe take some notes, write some things down that were impactful, and then come back. Okay, I hope that you took a little break, even though I know that there's a good chance most of you didn't. I promise it is helpful a lot of the time, just because it gives your mind a minute to think over the material, and then you come back and sort of refresh, like, oh, right, that's what we're talking about. And that process is really helpful for learning, which coincidentally, not coincidentally at all, is the reason I ask you to make primary comments and secondary comments on your perusal assignments, because if you make a primary comment, that indicates, okay, I thought about it once, but then when you come back to make the secondary comment, your mind has to recall what you learned, and that helps you learn it a lot better. So there is a reason behind what we're doing there. Okay, we're going to be really brief here. I just want to go over how to read research a little bit. So every research article will follow this structure. So you have an abstract and figures, an introduction, methods, results, and a discussion or conclusion. If all you do is understand the abstract and the figures, you will have a really good understanding of the research article. And I mean really understand it. Don't glance over it. Read it, feel like you could explain it. That will do wonders for you if you don't read the research article. But if you do read the research article, even then it's still really helpful, because now you're like, okay, this is a general summary of what I'm about to read. Now let me get into like more of the nitty-gritty of what I'm interested in, perhaps. Now, there are a lot of people who will read specific sections of a research paper, and what section you read is dependent on what portion of the research you're interested in. So let's say I'm a researcher in physical activity and mortality. I might not care that much about the introduction because I feel very familiar with what the literature says on physical activity and mortality. So introductions usually cover, what does other research say in this area? Where are the holes in that research? And then what is the purpose of the research? Okay, so that is a piece that I would highly consider looking at in every research paper. It will always be the last paragraph of the introduction is going to cover what is the purpose or the research question. What's the purpose of the study that I'm about to do? Okay. I will say, if you don't have a good understanding of the current state of research literature, the introduction is a great place to start. And if you want to find, let's say, some other research papers on a similar topic, that's a great go-to section. The method section is where a lot of researchers will go first. So the method section is, what did they do in the study? Okay, so how did they collect their population? How did they sample? Then what data did they collect and how did they collect that data? And then what statistics did they perform and how did they perform those statistics? So it was a regression, yes, but what kind of a regression? Okay, they used a multivariable Cox regression, right? That's something that I'm interested in. And you do want to check, like, do their methods actually answer their research question? Because occasionally you read a paper and you're like, wait, I don't think you said your purpose was X, but then your analysis didn't support that in your method section. Okay. In the results, it is just looking at the results of their statistical analyses, okay? So we're not interested in their interpretation yet. There should not be a, we saw increased mortality risk, therefore everyone needs to be physically active. No, we should just see there was an increase in mortality risk with individuals who experienced low physical activity. Done, okay? Results have no interpretation. So a lot of times, researchers who feel confident in their ability to analyze literature and results on their own, they will actually sometimes skip the intro and the discussion and just do methods and results if they are strapped for time, for example. Whereas I find a lot of undergraduate students will go straight to abstract and then maybe intro and discussion and sort of skip this part because it feels a little gibberishy to them, okay? So just interesting how you may read a research article based on your current understanding of literature, for example. And then the discussion or conclusion is where you start to interpret your result, and then you typically give it some context by comparing it to other research. And you may talk about the impact that your research has as well. Usually this is a section where you see some limitations and some strengths of a study as well. Okay. Okay. This is the article you're reading this week. Okay. I put this on here mostly because I was going to have you go find it on your own, but I'm actually going to post it to perusal, so you won't have to. But this is your article for the week. So on that note, I'm going to take you through some database searches really quickly. So give me just a second. Okay, and we're going to share my screen again. Okay, so if I just take you into a browser, and I'm going to take you into the Marriott Library. So actually, let me just start from scratch. So if we type in just Marriott Library into Google, should be the first result is the J. Willard Marriott Library. So if I click on that, and then I click on databases, I can actually filter databases by kinesiology specifically. And there's a whole list here. Now, the two probably most popular, you can see Scopus is recommended by librarians, and I'm very familiar with that. The other really common one is PubMed. So if you come down to, oh, there's Scopus again. Where is it? So there's PsycInfo. Oh, here we go. So Medline, PubMed. That's another one that's very commonly used. I'm going to use Scopus today. So if I click on Scopus, and then I'm just going to copy and paste the title of today's article here. Now, if I want an article that uses just that title, meaning all of these words in a row with no deviation, I can put quotes around it. Okay, and I'm very likely to have only one result show up, which is really nice. On the other hand, if I wanted to say, look at other papers who maybe looked at the same thing, I might type in something like physical activity and mortality, okay? And now you see I've got a lot of documents. So maybe I want to do and sedentary behavior. Now let's see if now we're down to only 1,300 documents, right? We're getting better. Maybe I want to also look at and smoking because that's a big part of this article. Okay, now I'm down to 291. Okay, so this is your year filter. Okay, so I might be most interested in articles, say, in the last 10 years. So every article you read in this class will be published within the last 10 years. Okay, so I'm going to now filter by last 10 years. Okay, I didn't reduce it too much, but a little bit. Then I might come down to subject area can be helpful if you're not a researcher. In this case, we all know sort of what our subject area is. So I probably could get rid of agriculture and biological sciences. I'm not going to bother with this yet because it's not going to reduce my search too much because you can see 211 are already in the medicine area. Okay, so I am interested mostly in a peer-reviewed research article or a review. So article means that they produce the research themselves. A review means, right, I'm looking at what other people have produced. So I'm going to look at both of those. Okay, and there's lots of other filters we can use, right? So for most of you, right, I might be interested in just papers from the United States. However, the UK, Australia, even a lot of papers out of China use English. So you used to be able to filter by language as well, but it looks like that option's been taken out for now. Oh, here we go, in English. Okay, so we'll filter by that too. Okay, so if I limit to that, okay, now I'm down to 218. Another really useful feature is over here. So maybe I'm interested in the newest research, particularly if I'm a researcher. I want to see, okay, has anything else been published recently on this? But if I'm not trying to produce my own research, I might be interested in papers that had a really big impact. So I'm going to look at all the papers that have the highest citations, okay? So in this case, heart disease and stroke statistics, right? So that's from the American Heart Association. So big organization, well recognized, okay? Now, the reason I'm showing you this is because every week you will have to use an article, cite an article for your post-class engagement work. Now, if I come back here, I'm going to show you this real quick. So if I just type in the article that we're reading this week, some quotes to find it easily. Okay, now if I click on find it in Scopus, okay, there are a couple options for me. First, I can click on citation. Now you'll note there's no AMA citation here, which is the format that I ask you to cite in. Will I notice if you use APA? Maybe sometimes, but a lot of the time, probably not. So I'm not going to be super picky on that. I just need you to cite it. But in your paper for the midterm, you will need to use AMA. If I go into the PubMed paper, okay, so this is same paper, right? And now I click on cite. You can see I can change the format to AMA, APA, MLA, right? But I'm interested in AMA. So you can literally just click copy and then paste it into your document, okay? All right. I think that is all I'm going to share for now. That was a lot. I hope your brain is okay. Please review this, make comments to each other, and bring questions to class on Thursday. All right, we'll see you then.